And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. And these words, which I commanded thee this day, shall be in thy heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. That was Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 7a. Welcome back to another episode of Thinking Well Podcast. I'm Kyle.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Brice.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
What's up, man?
It's been a long week.
Yeah, no kidding.
I actually had the day off today, so it wasn't too bad.
It's been a short week for
It's been
you.
a short week for you. Yeah.
Must be nice.
Good days, though? Good weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good, man. Good.
Not bad.
Well, I won't spend too much time on you, gentlemen. I see you guys every week.
Yeah.
We have 3 guests with us today, all women. It's first for us on Thinking Well Podcast. Go ahead and introduce them, Tom.
All right. So we have Erin. Erin, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Erin Madson. I have been a member here at Lakewood Baptist Church for a few months now, and we've just really enjoyed getting to know the church family.
Awesome. And then we have Mandi.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mandi Herrera. I'm mom to 3 kiddos. We've been a member at the church here for about 4 years, I think.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Awesome. And then we have Sarah.
Hey, I am Sarah Coates. I have 2 kids, 10 and 6, and we've been here for about 7 years, I believe. 7 or 8, maybe.
And Sarah is also Andrew's wife,
What?
our baby
Yes.
deacon, who has been on the podcast before.
That is true. That is true.
The tips.
It's crazy to hear, how long you guys have been members.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like that long.
Even you, Erin, it feels like much longer
Yeah.
than just a few months.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like much longer.
Yeah, it does to me too, which is a blessing for the church to make you feel this much at home so
Yeah.
quickly.
Yeah,
I
amen.
was just going to say that's super cool how like we all got this different time here, but we all still feel like family. It feels like we've known each other forever.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah. All right. So we are here. We're going to talk about an interesting topic, a controversial topic, I would say, homeschooling. And before we get started, I do want to say that this isn't about trying to sway people one way or another. This is presenting different viewpoints, different advantages. You may even hear some disadvantages, but we want to kind of look at homeschooling, public schooling, what would be the right decision. We are in no way going to be able to dictate that for you or your family, but what we hope to do is just provide some insight on how you can make that decision, and just kind of, if you've never heard about homeschooling before and you're kind of like, well, what's it all about, to give some, some data points on it. And so I myself am a product of partial homeschooling. I was homeschooled up until, we were on deputation as missionaries, so I was homeschooled that whole time. And in Germany, we actually homeschooled for like the first 3 years that we were there. And then the German government said, no, we're not going to allow that in Germany at all anymore. You have to put your kids in some kind of public school. And so we started going to public school right around 5th grade. So from 5th grade until I graduated from the 9th grade in Germany, I was in public school. I will say that my homeschool experience was pretty good. My parents did very structured homeschooling. Like, it was like we were in school every day. So like we had even like these things that mounted up against the wall that you pulled like the desk down from, and we had like times that we started school and times that we ended school for the day. It was very structured. But then when my parents got back, they homeschooled my 3 youngest siblings, and that was kind of, in my mind, it was like all over the place. Like, they started at like 10 sometimes, and sometimes they wouldn't do school for 2 days, but then they do school for 6 hours like 3 other days. And it was like, why couldn't I have gotten that schedule? That's not
how it always
She
is. You're the first.
was a guinea pig.
Yeah, that's what it was. Well, that didn't work too well for them.
Joke's on them.
And then, so I will say that one of my biggest concerns about homeschooling in general for myself was when I came back to the States, my German diploma, which doesn't make any sense to me, is more complicated in the 9th grade in Germany than it is here in the 12th grade in America, but yet no one in America wanted to recognize my German diploma. They said that I was short on credits to have the equivalent of a high school diploma. Not that I've ever let that hold me back, but my 3 youngest siblings were actually able to get diplomas issued by my mom that are recognized by colleges. And I didn't even know that until like we started kind of talking about this subject, and I was kind of touching base with my mom to see how that all worked. And she was like, yeah, I was able, the laws in Illinois where they graduated allow her to sign a diploma, and it's recognized by, I mean, most colleges in the United States, which is crazy to me, like that we've come that far, right? But I will say that was my experience. While I put down on, and I don't know who's going to be listening to this, I'm not stupid. While I put down on job applications that I do have the equivalent of a high school diploma, I actually do not in the United States, but I do have a German diploma, so I'm going to call it a count. But
it's definitely going to affect the way I look at you, Tom.
I know. I'm just hoping nobody from like where I work listens to it. Like, wait, what?
And you're fired.
You lied on your
Never finished
application.
school.
I did not. It said equivalent, and it is equivalent in my mind. So everyone all the guests that we have here today have varying degrees of involvement or experience with homeschooling. I think because it's Erin's the closest to me. Erin, we will start with you. Just tell us a little about like how you kind of started on your homeschool journey, how that decision came about, and what kind of influenced that for you? Because you actually were a teacher for a while in a private school. We had been talking previously. So go ahead and let us know like what the journey was for you.
So my husband is active duty military, and that means that we travel every 2 to 3 years to a different state usually to live in. And so for us, teaching at home made sense because you could keep your curriculums consistent and have flexibility over if you're traveling, you're not really limited. And we actually do school year round. So we kind of have like a 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off schedule where we can just take vacations or go explore, take like field trips and things like that when we want to, or even just to go visit family. So and even the hot summer months of Texas, we can stay inside for quite a few hours and do school, and then go out whenever we want, or you can even start later in the day and let the kids enjoy the mornings that are a little cooler. So we kind of started our journey because it made so much sense for our family, just for a variety of reasons. But we have just really enjoyed being able to just disciple our kids like one-on-one a lot and spend time with them and let them kind of we let them explore the areas of study that kind of interest them. And my children are 6 and 8, so they're pretty young, but we started probably like at 2, where we just had a lot of fun with learning. And that's the other fun thing you can do with homeschooling is basically it's a lot of learning through play. And a lot of daycares and such do that. Like if you have your children in traditional school or like starting that young. So yeah, we just sort of kind of fell into that journey because of all of our circumstances, and then just kind of have enjoyed the flexibility since we started.
Okay. I kind of like that concept, like the 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. That does really like open up so much that you're able to do, because you're not waiting for like this 3-month window.
Exactly.
And then it's the hottest months of the year. So if you really wanted to go on vacation, like where are you going to go where it's not hot?
Right. Well, you also get to take advantage of a lot of things that are very less crowded when it's because everybody's in school. So you can like even things like cruises or theme parks or things like that, like where traditionally they'd be pretty crowded during the school year or during the summertime. You can kind of choose where you want to go. And it actually works really well for international too, because you can go to and explore other countries or other and if you're in the States and you need to stay here, you can you have a lot of flexibility with travel.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I never even thought of that.
Yeah. Well, I like that a lot. I wish I would have, my parents would have done that. That'd been awesome. I guess a question that I have regarding that is, do you think because you guys do a year round, the time off, is it equivalent to like a 3-month kind of thing? Or do you think the
I've
kids
never
will
really done the
graduate early?
math because I think it's more of like what makes sense for us. But like we don't have a traditional start-stop for, like, we generally end around, like, for the school a year, I guess you could say, like the material, like for the year, we usually end that maybe like a month later than the public schools or private schools. Like, but then we kind of give ourselves a couple weeks, to travel and go see family. And then we get back and started probably usually in July, kind of like the hottest month. In every state we've pretty much lived in is July. And also the mosquito situation is usually awful. And so we're just like, hey, we'll stay inside. And then we enjoy a break in September for around birthdays for, a few people. And like, so I feel like it just gives you like flexibility to do what makes sense for your family. And because you're not bound by the state's idea of what school is, you really can have, and a lot of schools are actually thinking about this, is going to like a 4-day school week. And so a lot of homeschool curriculums are actually focused that way, where you do the work for, Monday through Thursday. And then Fridays are kind of like a day where you go off and do field trips, or you do like homeschool co-op meetups, or even sports or different things. And that's another thing that you can do when you homeschool is there's so many resources, especially in Texas, for like the jujitsus and like the different sports that you can do during the day while a lot of and they cater to homeschool parents because of that, or make it your library day, or make it a day like there's so just extra resources that are available that that if your kids were in school you may not be able to have time for because of your schedule for work or such like that. And I'm blessed to be able to stay home with the kids. My husband is able to provide that way, and that doesn't work for every family, and we totally get that, and that may not work in the future for us, but we're just enjoying where the Lord has us right now.
Yeah. One of the things I think, and so my kids went to public school here in the States their whole lives. One of the things I think that's always bothered me about the American public school system is this, and I've never gotten it, and Crystal has always been like, I don't understand why you don't get this, but like, I don't get the sports thing and like America's preoccupation with like, oh, your kids don't do any extracurriculars. Like, so in my mind, I compare things to like Germany all the time. And I'm sorry, I know I haven't lived there for like 30 years, but I still compare things. Like in Germany, when you went to school from 7 a.m. to 1:30. And when you were done, that was it. You went home, you did your homework, and there was no extracurriculars. They did not have school sports over there. They did not have school clubs over there. If you wanted to be a part of a sport or part of a club after school, then that was something that you paid for, that organizations provided in the area, but it was not something that was part of your schooling. Like, you went to school to learn. And when you were done for the day, you went home and you had like assignments that you had to finish and stuff like that. But school was for learning. I think one of the things, the more I've like looked into this and the more I've studied it, which it's too late for my kids, they've all graduated. But one of the things I really like about the homeschool method or the flexibility that it gives you is like you don't have to push your kids to be in something. Like, oh, you need to be in sports because, little Johnny over here is in sports and little Susie over here is in gymnastics, and no, you need to be in band. And I'm not saying that those are bad things, don't get me wrong. But I know a lot of American high school graduates that were really, really focused on sports when they were in high school, and they cannot put a coherent sentence together on paper. It's not that they're dumb. They can speak just fine and they're plenty intelligent, but they you read what they write and it looks like a first grader wrote it, and it has the same misspelled words that a first grader has. And these are high school graduates. It's like this weird focus, especially when you get into smaller towns, it becomes, oh, well, yeah, so Kenny, he can't really spell all that good, but we need him to play in the football game, so we're going to bump him up the next grade. And I'm not saying that happens like largely in bigger cities, but I'm telling you right now, like small towns, I've seen it multiple times.
It probably happens more than you realize.
And that kind of thing was crazy to me, where from a homeschooling perspective, like, if your kid isn't interested in any of those sports things, then it's not a like, well, you have to do it because everybody else is doing it. What are you interested in? And they kind of have that flexibility to say, well, I'd really like to play an instrument, or I'd really like to learn, this sport. And you can do that, but it's not this at the sacrifice of your education. But we'll definitely come back around to Erin, but Mandi, you have been doing this for about 2 years now.
About 2 years.
So kind of share with us why, the why of why you decided to, because one of your kids did go to public school for a little bit, correct?
Well, both boys.
Both
yes.
boys? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then at some point you decided this kind of doesn't work for our family.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of tell us about that journey and your experience so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're first generation homeschoolers. The kids went to school. My boys were in 2nd and 5th grade when we pulled them out. It's something that was on our hearts. I feel like after getting saved early in our marriage, we wanted to have kids. Excuse me. And we waited to have kids for a bit. And once we started our family, it was something that we talked about, but we kind of didn't have the courage to do it, I think. We didn't know very many homeschoolers. But so we would pray about it. Excuse me.
Very good.
Push it to the side and kind of come back to it. And it's something off and on throughout the years we talked about, but COVID kind of gave us a test run, right?
Okay.
So things kind of changed where we're doing virtual school. Although that's a little different, well, I would say a lot different than homeschool, actually. Homeschool's much more pleasant than virtual
was
school.
Was the virtual school still like really, really structured?
Super structured.
Okay.
And the Zoom calls and things were hard to keep up with. The quality of learning was, subpar, I think. We were all just winging it.
Yeah.
We had never lived through a pandemic before. But we got a little taste of it, and we kind of prayed about it again. And we sent them back to school once lockdown was over and they got readjusted. But then we started feeling like this really big pull in our hearts. Like I believe it was a spirit pulling us that way to homeschool, because we felt like, and it's no slight towards public school or anything like that, but we started to feel like this pressure, like we were dropping them off for a full-time job. Mm. They were getting up at the same time my husband was getting up, 6:30 in the morning. And by the time I was able to get through both pickup lines at 2 different campuses, we were getting home at 4:30 when he was clocking out, right? So the kids are exhausted, and they're coming home with laptops and homework on the laptops, and their lessons, we were learning that they were viewing YouTube videos for the lessons and doing worksheets that kind of go along with it. And to be honest, no judging, but we were kind of like, maybe we are qualified to take a stab at it. But no, really, it was a real pull on our hearts. But the tipping point, I think, for us was, unfortunately and kind of unexpectedly, my dad got sick and passed away. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. And when he did, I think it was a big wake-up call. And I'm thinking, what are we doing? Like, life is so short. He was not very old, and it just happened, pretty quickly. It's something that was on our hearts. And as soon as that happened, we were like, let's just do it. Like, I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I always have been. It's something that I really wanted to do. So it was a pretty easy transition for us. And so that kind of sent us forward. We prayed about it. And the biggest thing that we did was we reached out to our church family, and there are a lot of supportive, amazing friends here that were talking us through it. What are the benefits? What are the negatives? There are also benefits of, fully grown adults that live through the homeschool process. So we were able to kind of pick their brains. Did you miss this? Did you miss that? What can we do? But I think the biggest impact for us was our church family, and we felt like supported, and we could get opinions that mattered and swayed our decision. And it felt like there's nothing more important than raising these kids that God has entrusted you with, right? And kind of to what Erin was saying, to disciple these children one-on-one, it's a pull on your heart. And I felt like we were just not at rest with dropping them off. And like I said, no offense to anybody that's doing that. It's just, I think that it was a call personally in our hearts. And after that, it was kind of a wake-up call. So we decided to do it. He passed away in August, and in the end of September, we pulled him out. And So,
Any,
and it's
any
been
regrets so far?
no regrets. I mean, well, you know what? There's one regret, and I wish I had done it sooner. Honestly, that's the truth. I mean, you're going to have your bad days, your busy days. The kids might not want to stay in their seats, but they were going to have those days in public school. So I'm just glad that they're not getting in trouble for that, and that we're able to take the brain breaks when we need them and reset. And it's amazing.
What's your schedule like? You know, Erin gave us a walkthrough of hers. What about yours and your kids?
Ours is more of a traditional summer break, but we do a Monday through Thursday schedule, and we call them Fun Fridays. So they're field trip Fridays, usually out to eat somewhere fun like CC's Pizza or something. But we do museums and things like that. Something that's learning, but it's our Fun Friday. So we get our learning done during the week.
So
That's super cool.
yeah, that is really cool, man.
I'm really jealous now.
I'm
that
like
I
thinking now of like all the things that I could have been doing with my kids.
My
while
childhood
man.
sucked.
Wow. Sorry, Malik. There's so many things going through my brain right now.
What time do you start and stop?
We start about 9. I wake them up, but we give them 8 to 9 to play outside. We start our day outside as long as the weather's fine. But even if it's raining, we put rain boots
Every
on.
day, no matter what.
I feel like it's a great way to get those wiggles out as soon as they get up. And they eat breakfast. We start about 9 and we end usually around 12:31, just depending on how much we're doing. Sometimes it's earlier, sometimes it's later, but for the most part, we're able to get it done with brain breaks.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That is really
So,
awesome.
So I'm guessing you guys have breakfast together and everything.
Yes.
Like, how cool is that? And Erin, y'all too.
Yeah.
That's cool to be able to just like. So for a lot of families, I think it's come around the dinner table in the evening, right, and recap your day and stuff like that. But I mean, what a great opportunity to like get started with your kids in the day, because I know from like my kids going to public school, it was they're grabbing. They got up late, they're grabbing a Pop-Tart and they're heading to school, right? And then if they get into these extracurriculars, all of a sudden your evening time at the dinner table is gone too, right? Because they're off doing a sport or band, or you're packing up to go somewhere where they're doing a sport, and like a lot of that one-on-one time with your kids like gets lost in that, where I think it's really cool where you get to spend breakfast with them, and then like you don't necessarily spend the whole day together, right? Because they go off and they do their things in their room once school is done, but then you get to come back together at the end of the evening and like have dinner together. And then that's just super cool.
Well,
man.
I saw the look on your face when she described when she wraps up. So I think I'm going to tell you a secret that I might get a negative comment about, but a lot of school, and I can tell you this as a teacher, is babysitting. Where you are, there's not a lot of academic learning. And you know this if you went to school, because how many times did they pull in the TV and you watched a video?
Yeah.
Those were the best days.
Yes.
Never said it
and
more.
because we don't have traditional music class or PE class, or you think about like the study halls that you sat in and did homework in. And what we do is we start our day about like 8:30, something like that. Like I try to get them to start earlier, because I tell them the sooner you start, the sooner we can be done.
Yeah.
And like, so we do take breaks, and like Cyrus goes out and plays basketball for, 10 minutes to get his wiggles out, like in between subjects, just because he's a very intense learner, and like he'll get sore neck, like from like intensely staring at whatever he's looking at. And so I feel like in schools, if you have a good teacher, she is finding ways, or he is finding ways to take breaks in the day, because that's just absolutely what children need, no matter what system that they're in. But the benefit of being at home is that they can do it in whatever style they want. They can craft, they can go outside, they can, read a book for a while that's just on their own, or just have a conversation with a parent or a sibling, or play. And so I think that is one benefit. But I think one of the biggest reasons why a lot of parents are pulling their students out of school is because they're seeing that, especially during COVID, how much time was wasted by doing just time filling stuff, worksheets
Busy
that
work.
are really unnecessary. And I think parents are also seeing that traditional testing, which has been proven to be a very inaccurate way of testing proficiency and knowledge in a subject, or because what if you are an anxious test taker or whatever? And I was very dyslexic as a student, and I did not have resources in the school I was in, But when you notice your children has learning disabilities and you're homeschooling them, you see it like right in your face.
Yeah.
It's different than when a teacher comes to you and says, I think your student might be dyslexic, because you're just like, oh, I'm sure it's fine. Like, you're not thinking of it the way you are whenever it's in your face and like you're watching it in front of you. And so I will say that I do think that public schools and some private schools have the advantage is there's a lot more resources for those students, because parents that are homeschooling have to go find them. Yeah. And they are out there, but they cost money and you have to pay for it out of pocket. So that is definitely a negative for parents that are homeschooling, is that they definitely have a hard time finding those resources for those children that are struggling without having to go into their own pockets to pay for it, because it's not traditionally paid for by the state, like it is for if you're a public school or private school student. So that's something that I think that a lot of families, that if they say, if they're asking themselves if they could do it, if your child has special needs, or if your child, and some special needs can be cared for at home for sure, maybe even better so than in a school, but like learning disabilities and such like that, the teachers are trained, and they do have extra resources that they can direct children to that unfortunately aren't really available easily unless the parents go out and search for those.
Absolutely.
I did see the other day, I was reading an article where there's a state that's talking about like giving parents that homeschool like a tax credit or like an actual like funding every year. I just saw like there's a state that's like, but so that's the thing, right? Like if they start helping pay for it, then they
don't want to put their nose in it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing that most traditional homeschool parents will tell you, because they're so nervous about the state sticking their nose into the curriculum that they're teaching, because it's almost like they're saying, oh, well, we want you to have this tax credit, but so what are you teaching your students? Like, what books are you using? We really prefer you to use this curriculum. We'll give you even a bigger credit or whatever. Or I'm so sorry, we can't give you this credit if it's a religious-based curriculum. Most traditional parents, the homeschool parents, will tell you that they cringe when they hear that the state wants to stick their nose in it. But I can tell you that I have seen homeschooling done extra wrong, in the sense where parents are not teaching their children efficiently, or forget traditional, like they are going to the extreme where the children do not know how to put a coherent sentence on paper, or even write, or their penmanship is illegible. I definitely think that not every parent that homeschools does it properly. And I wish I could say that across the board, that everybody's a dedicated parent, but whether it's because of their own lack of understanding of how to do it, or they're just, maybe it's their personal beliefs that like they want to, there's a term that's called unschooling your children. And it's not a negative term, in the sense that they're just, that movement is more about moving away from the way public schools do it. They're just saying, like, we don't want to do it the way the public schools do it, but they are still traditionally teaching their students like reading, writing, arithmetic, and extracurricular activities, but they don't want to do it in the same way that public schools do it. So I feel like I have seen fourth graders who couldn't read, though, and to me that is heartbreaking, because not only does that give it a very bad light on schooling, or homeschooling in general, but it also leads into the children just not being prepared for real life. I mean, in my mind, my husband and I's job is to prepare our children for life, and I think that that's the best thing that we can do and are supposed to do. But so I definitely think that I wish that those parents that don't take homeschooling as seriously, or maybe just aren't as equipped to do it, would get help and get resources, because there are a lot available to them. A lot of people who say, well, where do I start? Like there are a lot of people who are willing to give them some guidance and such, but it's just heartbreaking to me that that children that are homeschooled sometimes are very isolated, which is also not good, and also, because that's not needed. Like that's so not needed in this day and age. There's so many homeschool co-ops, so many opportunities for meetups, even in just parks and hanging out with other children, that I think is, so when we talk about this, maybe some of the negatives of homeschooling, it will be when someone does it where they isolate their child, or they neglect certain subjects, or they neglect the extracurriculars that maybe that child would be really good at or interested in, and just keeps them home just because they don't want to leave their home.
Right. There's actually something I was also reading about a homeschooling movement in another state. I will get to that shortly. I didn't want to skip over Sarah. Mm-hmm. So Sarah, a full product, right,
yes.
of homeschooling from beginning to graduation. So tell us a little bit about that and like your experience with it. And then your kids go to public school.
Yes.
And what the kind of decision was there. It's a good, bad, and different. Just what it was like for you.
So yeah, I was homeschooled from kindergarten through high school. I'm the third of 8 kids.
Okay.
My mom homeschooled all 8 of us.
Wow.
So she is a bit of a saint.
Yeah.
No kidding.
So their decision was like when it got time for my oldest sister to go to school, she just didn't want to part with her or with us for that long of a day. So, and back then it was not, I mean, it's not even mainstream now, but like everybody knows someone who homeschools probably. It was not back then at all. So they were kind of a ship out of water, like not common, not a ton of resources. So we were homeschooled all the way. She homeschooled all 8 of us through kindergarten through high school. So graduated. I have a diploma. I think it came from Mardell's.
Okay.
And they signed it, and that counts.
But recognized, right?
But recognized in the state of
Yeah.
Texas. I went to college in Maryland after we got married, and I don't remember having any problem with that. Because it's literally just a certificate paper from Mardell's that they signed. I didn't want to have a graduation because that's just my personality. Multiple of my siblings had different styles of graduations. Okay. I did not prefer that.
See, that's kind of cool too, though, that you got like, okay, so maybe you're not the person that likes to walk in front of a whole bunch of people and have that done, right? And so as, you know, with homeschooling, you have that option. Wow, 8 kids homeschooled.
What was your schedule like?
Impressive.
So ours, we started pretty much like Mandi said, we started around 9:00 in the morning, and then we were done by about 12 or 1.
Cool.
And it was always the big threat. Like if you don't pay attention, you have to do afternoon school, and nobody wanted to do afternoon school. So that was a pretty good threat, pretty good easy threat from my mom. Was like, don't. You have to do it after lunch, and then you won't get to play. You won't get to do whatever. So it was
What do they call it in public school? Whenever you had to stay, was it night school or what was it? Saturday school?
Yeah, something.
Saturday school.
Can you imagine them taunting afternoon school? That was just every day for us.
Yeah.
So what kind of curriculum did y'all use back then?
So we used multiple different things. We used a curriculum called Rod and Staff, which is kind of a Mennonite Amish curriculum. Okay. For the younger, probably like elementary age. And then Bob Jones and Rebecca for the older grades. But she would do, she did not ever pick just one curriculum and buy everything from that one company. She would just kind of put together what they wanted. My dad was a biochemist, so the maths and science classes books were very important to him. So he didn't want just like anything like super basic. But yeah, so it was just kind of a mishmash of a bunch of things. She would find, do it for a certain math curriculum for a couple of years and then decide if she liked it or not. And then, which was kind of the nice thing about that. Mandi and I were talking earlier. Another super positive, which doesn't seem a positive when you're in it. And I know it stresses a lot of moms out. I have a lot of friends who homeschool and they're like, oh, my kids are in like 3 different grades. Well, that was super commonplace for us. We didn't know. It would frustrate my mom because somebody would ask us, what grade are you in? I don't really know. And she'd be like, you're in 3rd grade. It's fine. Like we're fine. We're normal. But we would be in like 2nd grade spelling or like 4th grade math, depending on, what you excelled in or what you struggled in. And as long as there's an improvement, it may be a lot slower. Or it may just be, you have to do spelling a little bit longer than the, the year long. Yeah. And as long as there's a little bit of progression, that's fine. Like the child can learn slower in, English or reading than they do in math or science.
Is that still how you guys do it today?
Yeah, for sure. That's the best part about it, really. I mean, that you can take whatever curriculum, like, and what, because some of it's just the style of learning. Like, we started with Abeka. I grew up in Abeka. I taught Abeka, and I went to Pensacola where they wrote Abeka. Like, so like I was all very traditional. And then when I started teaching, my son was bored in Abeka, and he was kind of grouchy about it. And I was like, wow, I don't know another way to do it. And so I looked into, from a fellow homeschool mom, and she was like, she talked about Singapore math, which is just a lot of mental math, and like the very fascinating way. And speaking as a dyslexic child, it would have been a way better way to teach me than to try to do it in the Abeka traditional memorization of all the facts way, because it's visual. And when, I mean, and not visual as in you're looking at numbers, it's visual as you're looking at objects. And I would have thrived under that as a student, because even watching Cyrus go through it, and now Alyssa, I'm just like, wow, I understand math a little bit better watching them do it. And so so we started doing the Singapore math, which is in a lot of different curriculums, that method, even Christian-based curriculums. And so I think that I'm glad that your mom was able to do that even back then when there was limited resources. Yeah. Because, I mean, there wasn't a lot to go from. And so I think that families that just have that, and now there's a plethora of options, you know, for, and even some curriculums, like our spelling curriculum recommends not even teaching traditional spelling until the child's is like in second or third grade. And it's because even though they use phonics, they just recommend it because the child's abilities are more strong. And like here we are trying to force kids to memorize words in first grade and second grade, when really it comes pretty naturally once they know how to read, and which you are working on in kindergarten and first and second grade. And so I was fascinated when I actually got to speak to the person who wrote the curriculum, and she was like saying the benefits of waiting a little. And I was like, wow, that totally defies everything I was ever taught in college about school. And I think that's the thing, is learning that traditional is not always best for every child. Like some children thrive under memorization and some children don't. And what do you do? And I can tell you as a teacher, when you have 20 to 30 children, you have at least 3 who are excelling at school that are waiting on everybody. And you have at least 6 or more that are struggling in school, and everybody else is in the middle. And you have to find a curriculum that works for everyone in the room. Yeah. Think about how hard that is. And even in your family of 8, Sarah, like that, your mom had to find what worked. And that was such a beautiful way to do it, where she was able to like say, you know what, as long as there's improvement, you don't have to stress about what grade level you're in, and you don't have in that subject.
You don't have to hold back the child because they're quote unquote failing math, failing one class. You can just go at that class
and impact
do
their
it again.
Self-esteem as well. Yeah. Because I know my son and my daughter both talk to me a lot about like they're frustrated because they call themselves names if they don't get something. And I'm like, you know what? All this test did was show us an area where we need a little extra work. Like you can see on your test that you literally missed just this style of problem. Yeah. Like you did excellent in every other style of problem. And when I passed out my test back to my students or to their parents, I could not have that conversation with each one of them. Yeah. Right. And yet those poor children were like, I got a C, or I got a D, or I got a B, and they didn't quite know what to do with that information, and neither did parents. And so if I could go back, I would definitely go back to each parent and maybe like write a note at the top and say, listen, this is the style of problem. Look at what your child missed. And a lot of parents are so busy that they never look at those test packets. They never look at what they're, because everything's on MacBooks now or whatever books, the Chromebooks, they don't have textbooks to look at anymore. So the parents, I had parents that in Virginia that were friends that they did not know what their children were learning at all. Even for homework, they did not know what their children were learning. There was no test prep. There was no like sitting quizzing your child for a spelling test the next week like there was when I was a child. I mean, so I was like, well, what is your kid learning? And she just couldn't tell me. And they were in 4th or 5th grade, but they were coming home with like drawings of protests, like in 1st grade of like the project was the child was asked to draw a protest with posters, like where the child's drawing had people, little characters holding posters protesting something, And like, so that's whatever the topic was. And this is Virginia, where it was quite liberal in the school system. And the parent was quite disturbed at the fact that, something that a child that young in first grade is, and it wasn't violent protest. It was peaceful. They had taught that, which was a very positive. It's not a terrible lesson to learn on how to advocate for something you believe in. But it definitely wasn't like the pro-life march in DC that they were drawing. And so that's why I guess that gave her pause, and she now homeschools a couple of her children. So,
and I think something about that is very key, right? So I know we're kind of skewing towards homeschooling in this conversation, and I want to make sure that people understand that it's what. If your kids are in public school, it's what you invest in them when they're not at school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes.
You should be aware of what they're being taught. So like when my kids were in school, one of the things that I make, because of how we were raising them, right? We were raising them in church. They had youth group around them. They heard good gospel teaching every single week, 3 times a week, most of the time, and sometimes even more than that. We were having family devotions at night when our schedule wasn't completely throwing that out of whack. But I would say probably 3 nights a week at least we were, and that's not including the Wednesday nights that they're already at church, right? We were having family devotions with them so that we were investing in them. And when they saw something that like didn't make sense to them in school, they would ask that question like, hey, like, this is something that's in this textbook, or this is something that my teacher is trying to teach us, and I know that we don't agree with that as Christians. What should I do about it? And one of the things that we were able then to do is like take them and talk to them about it and say, hey, these are things you're going to run into in life, right? And this is how you handle this situation. And while you need to complete the work because you're going to be graded on it, it's not something that you have to believe in order to accomplish that, right? Mm-hmm. So while I wouldn't say that, public school is the devil and everyone should keep their kids out of public school, I will say that you have to just make sure that you're investing as much time in them as the school system is investing in them, because the school system would love to indoctrinate your children. Trust me. Mm-hmm. One of the key things that both Mandi and Erin said is having that discipleship time with them. And you can have your kids in schools, 6, 7, 8 hours a day in a public school and still have the time to disciple them and do the things that you need to do in order, as the verse that we read at the beginning, to bring them up and invest these words that God has given us in the Bible in them. So Sarah, both of your kids are in public school, mm-hmm. right? And I think I've heard like Andrew before talk about like stuff that they've run into that maybe y'all don't necessarily agree with already, right? Is that true? Yeah.
So they both they're in first and fifth grade. So both in the same school for the last year. So
how sad.
I'm very sad about that. Next year drop off is not going to be fun. But they have already, and it's funny, like it ended up being nothing but the very first day of fifth grade. So I go through their backpacks every single day, even Max's, who's in fifth grade. And somebody asked me like, why don't you make them clean out their backpacks? Because I want to see their papers.
That's good. And
depending on the teacher, they don't get something every day. Like, Olivia's teacher will send it all on Friday, but I'll get like every single worksheet that she does. And so I'll be able to see. So the very first day of school, Max came home with this paper that said, guess the gender. And it was a word search. Yeah, it was like a word search game. And the very top of it was like, so like big text, like guess the gender. And I was like, what in the world? Like, I'm very non-confrontational, but I was like, I will die on this hill.
Yeah, for
like
real.
This will not happen. And then, so I was like, I'm not gonna freak out. Just like set it to the side, threw away what, didn't matter or whatever, set it to the side. And like he came through after he was playing. I was like, this looks like a really fun game y'all played. What is it? He's like, oh, and he was telling me about it. He's like, and it was a boy. And I was like, I know, but what did you do in class? He's like, my teacher's going to have a baby. And I was like, oh my gosh. In today's climate, why would you do that? Why would you send home this favor? So it was like a good 6 hours of me like, how am I going to call the school and like freak out on people? I don't know how to do that. But I'm going to, because this is terrible. But yeah, so that ended up being nothing, but it was like a whole couple hours of me super panicking on how to handle something that big, what would have been that big. So that ended up being nothing, but they've come home with like school, like friend issues. Max specifically has had like, I don't feel like the teacher's being fair, which also could be just a child's perspective or, just a one-sided perspective. So we've had to deal with those kind of like conflict issues and how to be respectful, but also how to, stand up for yourself and like what is right and what's wrong. And how do we stand up for ourselves when, somebody is picking it on us, but there's no one around to, those kind of things. Yeah. So we've had to deal with like those kind of issues, but there hasn't been anything like go to the school and talk to the teacher about. Except for the gender thing, which I did not do. Thankfully, I asked him first.
But when you think about today's climate, right? Like,
oh, for sure.
At some point,
our
kids in public schools are going to have to deal with this, right? Like, so right now they're dealing with it at like a friend level, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, my friend who is a girl now wants to be addressed as a boy, right. And so there's those kind of things that they're going to have to deal with. But I mean, when you look at where it's headed, right?
Yeah.
At some point, biology is going to start changing, right?
Right.
Well, I mean, okay, let's make sure we make that clear. Biology is not going to change
the textbook,
how it's taught in the textbook that it's
Yeah.
taught out of, right? It eventually is going to start skewing towards this like very, very liberal agenda,
Very
and I
progressive,
will
yeah.
say indoctrination, right? Because I look at what my kids had to deal with in school. And there were none. I mean, sure, they had a friend every now and then that was gay, and then they weren't really friends with them that much anymore because it was but that was because of the time we poured into them, right? Like they knew that wasn't right, and so if this person's going to make this kind of decision, I need to disassociate myself from them because that's not something that I can get on board with. It's not that I love them any less. It's just that I can't be. They can be an acquaintance, but they can't be a close friend of mine. So those were the kind of things they dealt with, right? But now, like, our kids are going to be going to school in 5 and maybe less, 10 years down the road. I would hope that it holds out that long. And we've got, people like Kyle and Brice here who don't even have kids in school yet, but they're going to be going to school at some point. And if it's public school, all of a sudden, now they can't say that, no, that's definitely a boy. I know that's a boy. According to everything I've been taught my entire life, that's a boy. But they're not going to be able to say that, right? Mm-hmm. And then they're going to come under, I'm not. And when I use the word persecution, I don't want people to think like I'm trying to steal the word persecution because nobody's going to get burned in a garden for a torchlight, right? But they're going to come under some verbal and some
definitely some opposition.
Yeah, sure. That like you can't say that. So we're gonna have our kids as Christians in this culture that their values and their morals put them in a minority, and we're seeing that shift already. And I would have to say that if I had school age kids right now, I would probably be going out of my way to figure out how I could keep them out of public and private schools, because we were talking a little bit before the podcast started that even private schools are not necessarily the route you want to go, because even if you pick and I'm doing air quotes here, quote unquote Christian private school, right? Like I know kids that went to Christian private schools and they didn't turn out any better than most of the kids that came out of the public school system. And I'm not saying that's the standard across the board, but I can name 2 or 3 off the top of my head that came out of Christian academies, Baptist Christian academies, that went down a completely different road, and that's just in my small friend group. Not friends anymore, but those things happen. So. And I will say that we kind of gathered a whole bunch of data and research coming into this. And it's interesting to see that since COVID, like there's been a rise in homeschooling, like people came out of it. And Mandi, I thought your point was really good, where we saw how we'll call it institutionalized learning, like did this fallback method during COVID where we kind of, the teachers, and listen, we were dealing with what we were dealing with, right? I get it. We were doing the best that we could. We were trying to figure out what was going on, but like phoning it in, right? Like you're there, but how do you fill up this 45 minutes worth of time, right? And if you only have 15 minutes of actual curriculum to teach, that means that the other 30 minutes of a 45-minute school hour are being dedicated to wrangling and trying to squeeze in 5 minutes of knowledge in every 10 minutes of Johnny, sit down. Susie, stop doing that. Stop passing the note that way. Okay, class, pay attention. And so between those 10 minutes of getting everybody wrangled, you're teaching 5 minutes worth of education in a 45-minute span. And then COVID comes along and teaches us that, like, hey, without the kids to wrangle, we're only teaching like 15 minutes worth of class. So how do we fill up this time? And don't get me wrong, I know some teachers that got really creative during that time, right? And they engaged the kids and they did a really good job.
They did.
But I felt like we also saw a bunch of, and I don't really know how to explain it, but sticking with it for the sake of sticking with it. Like, I'm going to do this thing that looks like learning, but we know it's not, but we still have to do it anyway. So Max did online school and he had a Chromebook, which I think had a trackpad on it. And they, for handwriting, would use the trackpad with their finger. I was like, that's not handwriting.
It's not handwriting.
And I'm like, we're doing handwriting. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, at least do it on a paper and hold it up. Like, but that was handwriting. I was like, that's not what we're doing. And I did feel like his school, we went to a different school, then they did pretty well with we actually did it for an additional year after they were allowed to go back, just because we liked him having him home and being done at noon. And I liked just seeing what he was doing.
Yeah.
But I was like, that's not handwriting to take your index finger on a trackpad on a Chromebook.
Where's your pencil? Yeah.
So I think there was just a lot of like, we're doing it for the sake of doing it, but it's not effective, but at least we can say that we're doing it. And that was a lot concerning to us, as like, I mean, Max is very studious and he's just kind of like that mind anyway. So it worked well for him. But even then we were discussing, and even Olivia was probably 3 or 4, and we're like, that we didn't think it would work as well with her to do it that way. So it probably depends on the child, but yeah, there was a lot of, that's not really learning. We're just checking a box to say that we did handwriting.
We still have to get our funding for the year, so we're going to do school.
Yes.
Well, that's what a lot of it was. You know, it was just we need those tax dollars, right?
Yeah.
So school has to be a certain period of time a day.
Well, like we got to be
have to have a
fair.
certain
We
amount
got
of
to be
days.
fair. It hit everyone like a bus.
Oh,
No one.
yeah.
No one was
No
prepared
one
for
was
it. I'm not
prepared.
demonizing it.
So-
I'm
I
just
mean,
saying
the
that
teachers
some people
that
handled it better
did
than others.
online school, bless their heart, like they,
Yeah.
a lot of them were really, really, really trying. I mean, and they were using already technology in their classrooms, so they were able to adapt it somewhat for public school. But my goodness, they trying to engage that many children on Zoom calls or whatever, like they were constantly having to reshuffle and rethink it and think on their feet. And they all deserve a gold medal. Like when they did not get to be like whatever person of the year, and the people that got to be persons of the year was like a joke. We were like, how in the world did you not make teachers or nurses
Right.
or
Yeah.
doctors persons of the year during COVID?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they worked
Good point.
their tails literally to the bone to serve their children and to serve the patients in the hospitals that were all going through such a terrible experience.
Well, they were
with
given like an
COVID.
impossible task.
Exactly.
Right.
A,
Yeah.
a disease that nobody knew what it was doing, and it was affecting everybody so much differently. And So, I mean, I feel like I don't want to make it seem like anybody in this room feels like they weren't trying. It was just, it's an impossible task they were given
for sure.
Absolutely.
to try to engage that many students in a loving environment, way that you would if you were in a classroom.
Especially
Because-
the younger students, there was like, I couldn't imagine like kindergartners,
Yes.
first year of school,
Yes.
trying to
No
figure
way.
out,
Yeah.
trying to figure out
how to
Zoom
sit.
on a
Yeah.
class.
Well, even sit in a chair.
Right.
Yeah.
When a
Much-
lot of
yeah.
times in schools they'll let the children sit on bouncy balls and exercise balls and different things for children with attention deficit, and that's a whole other category, was children with special needs and attention deficit disorder. And I mean, and I think if there's a way to turn this into with children with attention deficit in schools, I want to talk about that for a second. Is homeschooling is such a unique way of teaching children that struggle with those things, because especially boys, I can tell you as a teacher, when I was in a classroom, that they labeled a lot of boys specifically that were attention deficit that may not have been if they had had the opportunity for the breaks or been given different ways of learning, because attention deficit disorder is something that affects so many children in America compared to other countries. Not that maybe in those countries they don't have students that struggle with the attention deficit, but maybe they just handle it differently. But I feel like, especially I think of high school students, what did they take out? They took out gym. And I don't know about you guys, but when I see gym now in public schools, I see kids walking track.
Yeah.
Like I see all of them just going in circles on the track field, and that's just them trying to work out some of their wiggles. They're not running. They're not doing any of that. I mean, and
No
so,
one's climbing a rope anymore.
Exactly. Nobody climbs a rope. Nobody does push-ups and sit-ups, because heaven forbid somebody strains something. But I mean, they took out shop. Mechanic things. So
Working
in
with
my
your
heart,
hands.
like
The life
if
skills
I were
stuff.
to send my
Life
kid to a school,
skills.
it would be in a heartbeat if they would possibly put things like that back in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about Texas, that seems to be doing a really great job in their public schools with band
Yeah.
and things like that. I think some states are lacking in that, like where they don't have really good music programs because they don't have the funding
Yeah.
for it, and they've lost the music teacher, they've lost the art teachers, and now a lot of things is done. And so if I can shout out to anything for public school, it's the art and music and those kind of things are neat that in homeschooling situation we don't get. Like if we want band, you pay for a private tutor.
Yeah.
You don't get the orchestra experience. So that is a drawback. It is a serious drawback. I mean, and I know one of the things you wanted to discuss, Tom, was some of the things that are definitely a drawback for homeschooling or something that is just not, it doesn't look traditional. I mean, like you don't get prom, you don't get homecoming and things
Right.
like that. Although in Texas, there's quite a few proms and
Yeah.
things like that, which I thought was
There
kind of
are.
awesome. I was
Yeah.
like, okay. So there are homeschool co-ops that are huge for basketball and huge for different sports. And I think that's amazing about Texas. So any of you who are listening that want fun homeschool life, come to Texas for that. But because I have been to other states that
Just
do
come to
not,
Texas
just
anyway.
do not have that, I mean, and so I think about Sarah's children who, if they continue in public school, they will have opportunities for band and
Yeah.
music and plays that are harder for our homeschool students to do. They can be done. Like there are private theater groups and things like that, but it's paid for by your tax dollars to be able to do it in public school.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's a reason that we would say to not do it, but I definitely feel like Mandi and I are at a disadvantage in that way because we don't have a way of giving our children like the band experience. Even if we were to teach our children whatever instrument they want, they're not going to be playing in a full-on band like your brother
Right.
does for sports.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
that's a pretty neat experience,
Yeah.
and getting to lead that from a podium and have the whole football stadium cheering the band on. I think that's a pretty neat experience. And so I feel like there's definite things that in the homeschool community that that we have to supplement in different ways.
Yeah.
But I was going to bring up the verse, and you guys have probably heard it or thought about it, but it's the Deuteronomy 11:19. It says, "And ye shall teach your children, speaking of them, when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." I think, and that verse can be done in school traditionally,
Yeah.
or in a homeschool situation.
Yep.
The only difference is like Sarah's going to do it in the car line. Like
Yeah, and it's gonna be a
that's when
little
those
bit more
conversations
intense in the
happen.
afternoons.
Exactly. Like you're going to have those conversations at home around the table, or with your church family, like when you're here for Sunday for afternoon or whatever. I think that there's a misnomer in saying that verse couldn't apply as well. Like you said, you were able to do the discipleship. So I don't want parents to think that any homeschool parent is going to judge them and say that they can't find ways to do that discipleship, because you two grew up in school, but you have a very tight-knit family and your dad is very focused on discipleship. And so you can say for certain you were discipled, and it wasn't like public school kept that from you. But I think in the homeschool situation, you just have different opportunities. Yeah. Like we'll be listening to an audiobook, and I'll pause it and be like, and ask them about it, or we'll be reading a book together and you can do that in a public school situation, but you just have less opportunity because you don't have the time in the day, unless you're maybe on a road trip in the summer, which I think is a great opportunity to throw those audiobooks in your CD player or on your phone and listen to the books that that maybe you grew up with, that you love, like your Charlotte's Web and your we just got done listening to some more of the C.S. Lewis like the Wine, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series. And so being 6 and 8, like they're asking all sorts of questions about it was the one after the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, gonna escape it, Silver Chair. Yep. And so I had never grown up with that in being in a Christian school where my parents did not really do a lot of reading out loud to us, or audiobooks weren't really a thing back then. But I feel like that that parents that traditionally homeschool, or parents that don't, I feel like their kids are in Christian schools or private schools, you just have to be intentional. And I think that's where your verse at the opening really puts a shining light on is that discipleship is our job. I mean, one of the things that we kind of do that's fun in homeschooling is we call it Life Skills 101, where we do things like laundry and folding laundry. Dishes. And we say, you know what?
You got to learn how to do
this is something you're doing for laundry. Right. I mean, we got a ton of dirt delivered to our house for our back patio, and we were filling up a giant pit, and we were like, all right, let's get the shovels out after our school day was done. We're like, hey, this is Life Skills 101. We're going to help build a patio, and you can't Life do that if we were in school, we couldn't do that, because there's so much that you're doing. And so I feel like in homeschooling situations, you turn life events into lessons, and you do that every moment of every day. And if your kid is in private school or public school, you can still do those things. You just do it differently. Yeah. And so, like, to me, I really don't think that there is a that the Lord has put us in homeschooling in this season of our life. And like we were just talking about a podcast that we had listened to, where she was so good at explaining that there is no judgment, because the Lord might call us to be homeschoolers, for now, and then possibly send our children in. But I wish I got her name off the top of my head, but she made a really good point about not using the excuse that our children are going to be salt and light in the public schools. That was a good point. Made an extra good point, and I wish I could give her credit for it right now. But she made the point that our children are not developmentally ready to be salt and light necessarily, because they haven't had enough time to be, have the Holy Spirit really ingrained that the scriptures into their mind to where they fully understand them and such. And I think that was a really great point. Did you get her name?
No, I didn't.
Her first name is Abby, but her last name is not on there.
Yeah, the podcast is M for Mama, though.
M
I
is
will
for
give
Mama.
That shout out.
Let's give her a shout out to her.
But
it was really good.
That was really good, I thought. And I think one of the things that I think we could, and I don't want to cut anything off, but maybe for you and for your kids, maybe you're going to have a kid that really excels in public school, and they can handle it really well. Right. And maybe public school is the correct route for them, right? But maybe you have a kid that kind of struggles in public school, and it's not really they don't learn well in that kind of setting. They don't learn well in that type of traditional methodology. And maybe you need to do a hybrid for your kids, where you have one kid that goes to public school and one kid that you keep home, and if you're able to, that you keep home and teach it at home. you're not doing a disservice to either one. But one of the key things I think about homeschooling and public schooling is you can look at your child and you can make a decision as to what works for them. One of the detriments, I think, of any public school, and this is German public school, this is across the board, any public school, is that public school has the expectation that everyone at the same age is going to hit the same milestones at the same time from a learning perspective. And we do our kids as a society such a disservice teaching in that way. You look all the way back to the single room schoolhouses during colonial times and in Western times, and you look at how they were taught in a classroom setting, but where you had multiple grades in the same room. And the thing with that is, and especially like Sarah, what you said that your mom did, right? Like you can see that then that a kid is kind of gravitating more towards the fourth grade level things, and that the third grade level things aren't really interesting them as much because they're past that developmentally. Where as we get bigger as public schools and we split kids up into different grades, and then our classroom sizes grow as well, because let's face it, public schools are underfunded, our teachers are underpaid, and our curriculum, we're literally buying the curriculum from the lowest bid, right?
Right.
It's whatever is the cheapest and does the minimum. Now, don't get me wrong. There are teachers that take that and pour into kids, and man, there are more of them than we would even have time to acknowledge. But there are teachers in public schools that, and I would say most of them probably got into it with a passion for teaching children. And then in the grinder that I would call institutionalized schooling, some of that gets lost, right?
Right. You just
And
get
then it's
overworked
just you're showing up for work every day and you're trying to get through. Because I'll say one thing, my son Ashton wanted to be a music teacher. And he went to school specifically for that for 3 years. And after 3 years, he wound up dropping out before his fourth year started because he realized the way that the school system was turning, that he would not be able to pour into individual children the way that he would want to. And because of that, he became completely disenfranchised with it and just like, I'm not going to do this because I'm not going to be able to give the type of focus and give the type of teaching that I would want to be effective. And I think the more we look at the liberal slant that our society is taking here in the United States, the more we're going to see that you have these really well-intentioned Christian school teachers that want to go to school and be able to be, even as adults, right? That salt and light. And now we're in a society that no longer allows them to be that,
Right.
Which is, it's horrible for them, right? Because if that's why they got into it, and now their ability to do that continually constricts to where they can't even do that anymore, and so the domino effect of that is more people start pulling their kids out of public school, right? At a rate of 30% growth since COVID. Is one of the statistics that we found that was put out by a national institute of study here in the United States. 30% growth since after COVID. That's not even including the growth during COVID, right? But as we pull more kids out, right, then less money gets allocated and then your class sizes have to grow because less people are being teachers. Because there's nothing that because again, the teachers are getting disenfranchised because they can't pour into kids the way that they wanted to when they originally got into it. And so as you continue to see the decline of the funds available and the decline of people wanting to get into it that are of a quality that maybe we were used to when all of us were growing up, right? Now all of a sudden you've got this school system that is failing because we didn't want to continue to invest in it the way that we should have. But then there's this vicious cycle of we're not investing to it because they're not doing a good job, and then they're not doing a good job because we're not investing in it. Again, I'm not trying to, sorry, I'm being super negative on public school. I don't want it to seem like that.
I know what I'm doing.
Because there are a lot of teachers out there that are doing it every day. And I have nothing but admiration for them, because the teachers that are really doing it to pour into them, and again, I would say most of them, they're fighting an uphill battle against a system that does not want to reward them accordingly, is constantly overworking and overloading them to where they can't pour into those individual students. I mean, you look at even 15, 20 years ago, you had class sizes that were pretty manageable. And now, especially in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the way that we've grown exponentially, you've got class sizes that are between like 25 and 30 to a class. I mean, how can you expect each one of those students to get from the teacher who is like, I mean, working 16-hour days, right? Just trying to keep up with the workload and grading papers. And now they're having to teach 2 subjects because there's not enough for just the one subject. And
they're also dealing with behavioral issues and lack of parental support in a drastic way because of the way society is changing. And they're having to deal with things that they've never had to deal with before. And they did not sign up for this, which is one of the reasons why many teachers are leaving education. It is not the children. It is the situation that they're dealing with the parents and the administrators. But thinking about about homeschooling, though, because Sarah, you went through it your whole life, I really want to hear, and I think the listeners need to hear, anything that you could tell us about the negative. I mean, granted, this was several...
It was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. I'm going to say how long. Because I love you and you're my sister in Christ. But I'm going to say though that I know for a fact that at my age, homeschoolers were weird, because they dress different, they talk different, they look different. And now you can't hardly tell a homeschool child unless they're maybe a little more confident verbally. Like I know my children are always doctors and nurses and people that meet them on this, in town are always talking to me about how smart they are. And I'm just like, really? Like, they just seem like regular kids to me. But like, because they're just not used to children looking them in the eye and things like that, the way my kids do. And so, but I do not want to make it seem like that it's all roses and unicorns for homeschooling, because it's not. And so I feel like because you grew up in it, you can give us your perspective on the negatives and things that you wish maybe had been done differently.
So I will say, like, now people find out I was homeschooled, they're like, you don't seem weird, and that makes my heart very happy.
You don't seem weird.
I do. You and Andrew both are great examples of homeschoolers.
Yes, exactly.
It inspired us.
Yes, absolutely.
Like I will say, my personality is a little bit more introverted, so during the homeschool years, that kind of worked well for me. I was talking to someone at one point. Their child was having to do like in front of people thing at school, like and they were having a really hard time. And I was like, oh yeah, I had to do an oral book report, and I cried so much. She's like, oh, how'd you get over it? And I was like, well, I was homeschooled. It was literally my mom standing there, but I still cried a lot because that was like, I would not have done well in a group setting. But so for that, it worked well for me. But I do know what you're talking about when you say like most of the homeschoolers of before were odd. I think partly because, so I graduated in 2003. So is that 20 years ago? I graduated 20 years ago. I know.
You just told everybody you did.
Oh my gosh.
That's right. What did that?
I just did that math. So I graduated 20 years ago. And so it wasn't, and it's, 12 years before that is, when I started kindergarten, and it was not mainstream at all. And it's not mainstream now, but at least it's more heard of. And so I think back then, mostly the people who were homeschooling for very conservative religious reasons, not so much, anti-public school, like maybe, my kids go to public school and I'm even hesitant. But like very much your identity was in homeschooling, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
So I think that kind of adds on to the weird a little bit. It was already, not really mainstream Christian, but a lot more to the more conservative of that, if that makes sense. So that's probably where a lot of the weird came in. Like the easiest way to describe like how we were raised is the show of the Duggars. That's like how we looked, the dress, the jean dresses, all that. So we did have a you know, we stood out when we went places, and we were, you know, we didn't watch the same movies as, you know, so things like that. But also my kids will also go through that because we don't watch the same movies that a lot of people, even though I don't necessarily have that lifestyle now, my kids going to public school, there's still a difference between what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Right. If you talk to my son, every child in his class has a phone, and he's the only one who doesn't. Right. I don't think that's true. I think that's just his, it was that dramatic too. He told me.
What grade
I remember that line.
Is this fifth
He's
grade?
in fifth.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I wouldn't either. And he's been saying that since about third grade.
Okay.
Well, maybe back then.
So, but I wouldn't be surprised because I know a lot of them do. And even once he, you know, because it is something that we've talked about, you know, once he has extracurricular activities that maybe he's staying late for school at that we're not at, you know, that is something that we've talked about. But even then, it's going to be a lot more locked down than probably a lot of his friends or a lot of his peers at school. So he's even going to experience some of that distance of like norm. So yeah, I would say that the homeschoolers of before were probably odd, a little bit of oddballs. But I don't think it has to be that way.
Right. It doesn't.
Does that make sense?
I think it's much easier in this society, especially in
it's a lot more
homeschool-friendly
it's a lot more
state.
accepted now than it was then too.
It's becoming more mainstream than it has been for sure. But 20 years ago, there were just such limited resources, and like you say, a lot of parents were doing it out of fear or because maybe they had grown up in a liberal home and they were just extra trying not to be that way. Like they were like, we're going to be different. We're going to look different. We're going to talk different. And that can be taken to an extreme. And I know Sarah and I talked about indoctrination before where you're using the opportunity of homeschooling your children to almost create your own little, and it can look like a cult, really.
Cultish. Yeah.
It can be cultish. And so I feel like being at Lake Worth is so easy to not be that way because we have the leadership with Pastor Zach that is so gospel centered and discipleship focused on and just using the Bible as a guide. And he is not spouting his own ideals and he's not spouting his own preferences from the pulpit, which unfortunately, especially in the word fundamentalist, really got a bad name because of the Duggar situation and because of the hyper focused attempts to stay out of the world got a little extreme in that case. And those people who are familiar with the case understand all of the drawbacks that could happen with that. But the problem is that you just have to be willing to have your brothers and sisters in Christ, like, I want to say call you out on things, but like if they were to see something that they were nervous about or they're like a little curious about, like you need to be flexible enough to allow your brother or sister in Christ to talk to you about that. But I feel like if you're in a good church and you're tightly woven in to your church, that it is much less likely that would ever happen. But I feel like the more you're by yourself, the more you're at home, the more you're interpreting scripture for yourself and you're not really getting a different perspective occasionally, I feel like that is where things can go sideways pretty quickly.
Well, I think too, like when it comes to indoctrination, like for sure the isolation can just it can cause an echo chamber of this is the only thing that we talk about. This is the only thing that we discuss. One thing, and I think that can happen too, even if you do homeschool or private school or a public school. And I think the what we've seen a lot in private school is we have friends who have grown up in private school, and especially if it's a Christian private school, is you kind of feel safe because they're going to chapel or it's a Christian curriculum, and so there's not as you feel like they're getting that discipleship, and it's not as much at home as it is,
as much as it was
as it should be.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas the discipleship is the main purpose of the home.
Exactly.
Even beyond church. I think everybody should go to church and their kids should be in Sunday school, but it's not the church's sole responsibility,
yes.
if that makes sense.
Exactly.
But if one thing that Andrew and I have specifically try to do with our kids and whether we homeschool or private school or public school. And I think where they go to school now is like the third major discussion of what are we going to do about school. When he started kindergarten, I think during COVID, and then when we moved, and we're in a really good school district right now, and where we had lived before was not. So it was a bigger discussion, and he was able to go to charter school. But anyway, we try to not so much tell him, or tell mainly him because he's older. More Olivia is getting 6 where we can have these conversations now, but not so much this is the way it is and that's the way it is, but like this is the decisions that mommy and daddy have made for our family because God's put us in charge of our family. What do you think of that? And kind of encourage him to be involved in that conversation. And as he grows older, he knows, and we've talked about, our roles will shift to where he is more of the decision maker and we are more of a support, because we don't want him to turn 18 and be like, okay, now you're making all the decisions, where we've made every single decision so far.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's key from a homeschooling perspective. One of the things you said of like a shifting responsibility, right? One of the drawbacks of homeschooling in those situations is when the parents take over the discipleship to an extreme where it becomes a dictatorship, right? That's when you get into that kind of cult feeling. You don't get to make any of the decisions. We're going to constantly tell you how you're going to feel, what you're going to believe. You will read the passages in the Bible with us the way that we read them, and you're not allowed to study on your own. And we're always going to study, instead of giving that time to, hey, how is your Bible study going? And giving your kids time to do those kind of things in a homeschooling setting. One of the other misconceptions, because this has gotten stuff that gets plucked out, right? Like there's a bad seed in every single thing that you can do for your kids. Is those people that don't teach their kids. So there's this whole area in I won't say the state, but where they've pulled their kids out of school, but they're also not teaching them. Like they're teaching them how to like hunt and take care of a house and things like that. But they have the equivalent of an 8th grade education. Yeah. And they're not actually learning everything. They're not learning math skills. They're not learning language skills. And it's not that it's not important to teach our kids how to survive in this world should society fall and collapse, right? Which it's not going to happen, y'all. Not while we're on the earth anyway.
It's going to happen.
But just not while we're here.
I'm not going to be around to see it, but it's going to happen.
But preparing them for this perceived inevitability that society and culture as a whole is going to crash one day, and book learning isn't going to be necessary for you. What you need to know how to do is live off the land, and preparing them for that, but not preparing them for like intellectual things. And so,
how to argue a discussion, how to stand for your ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
intellectually.
And there are those that are teaching their homeschooling that way, and then they're calling that an education. But again, it's the same kind of dictatorship thing. Like they're shielding them from so many things and skewing. It's the indoctrination thing of skewing their mentality towards a certain avenue that's determined by the parents, and it's not necessarily something that we see reflected in the scripture.
Right.
Because the Bible does say to be in the world and not of it, right?
Right.
Yeah. And the key to that is that you're in the world. You can be out among society and still maintain your Christianity, your spirituality, and your faith. And you can do that in a public school setting. You can do that in a homeschooled setting. What we should be equipping our kids for, period, is to be, at some point, salt and light in whatever situation they're in. And again, maybe it's a good idea to keep them out of public school until they're 2nd or 3rd grade, right? And then they go into public school. But we really do need to, whatever we're doing with our kids, we need to do it with intentionality. We need to do it and be sensitive to their need, to how they learn. And if both parents work and that just doesn't work for you, then what you're going to have to do, parents, is go the extra mile take the extra step and be intentional with how you spend time with your kids, to where you're not relying on their Sunday school teachers to teach them about God, and to where you're not allowing their school to teach them about society, culture, and worldview. Because the only worldview that we should be teaching our children is that of a Christian worldview, and they will not get that in a public school. So if your children are in a public school setting, just remember that, like, they are not getting a Christian worldview.
And I would say
you are responsible
even
for that.
more intentionally, because they are getting
Right.
such, I'm a proponent for exposing them to alternate ideas carefully. But at school, I don't know. I may know what the curriculum says, but I don't know exactly what the teacher's saying, and I don't know what their friends are saying at recess or at lunchtime.
Yeah.
So having those intentional conversations, I would think, is so much more important, so that you do know, and creating that relationship where they are comfortable with saying, "Hey, my friend is looking like a boy now," or have where they're comfortable saying that, or my friend said he's gay. What does that mean? Or what do I do now?
It's such a great point, right? Because it's being intentional. Because like at school, right, with their friends, probably primarily their friends, but in some school districts, it is the curriculum that they're being taught as well. They are trying to indoctrinate. It's what's happening, right? Excuse me. So if we're not intentionally on the home front, whether it's public school, homeschool, private school, it doesn't matter really. It's our job, it's our objective as parents to, I like the analogy that Zach uses all the time. It's, your child is an arrow in a bow, and it's your job to point it in the right direction and let it go. And if you've done it right, it'll land fair and true, right? And the idea is, and we talk about it all the time, right? And it's definitely been part of my testimony, but it's like at a certain point, your child will go from, hey, this is the faith of my parents, to this is my faith.
Yeah.
And I think that's every parent's objective, is to get to that point where your child says, you know what, I believe this because I have found it to be true, and this is my faith, and that I can defend it to an extent. Not just because, dad believed, mom believed, grandpappy believed this. That's easy, right? But really, really getting into it and having a lasting effect is them making it their own.
Yeah.
I think.
Going back to what you were saying, Tom, I think another thing that parents, no matter what situation they're currently in, but they need to be prayerful about where the Lord might be calling them to do, whether it is to, if you homeschool, I do think it's time for you to put your child in school of some sort, if the Lord were to call you to that for some reason, for a season. But I think I hear more parents that use the, it sounds harsh to call it an excuse, but I think if you get down to it, it is an excuse. And they say, I could never do that. I don't have the patience for that.
I hear that a lot.
And then Mandi and we were talking about that, the other day with our homeschool co-op thing. And I think that one thing that I can assure you that I have not met many homeschool moms. I can't say I haven't met any, but I can say that I can tell you that all of them have said that they do not have the patience for it. There is no magical formula that has patience for a child who says, I hate school. Like, our kids say they hate school just as much as public school or private school kids say they hate school, but they just don't realize how much different their schooling is than public school. Like, we try to show them when we get up like at 6:37, to say we're getting on an airplane. They're like, hey, look, kids, there's a school bus. You'd be on that right now if you were in the school. And it's still dark outside. How do you think about that? And so we try to joke about it, and we don't want to tease in a negative way, but we do we do know our kids, and we do know that they would be like, oh, I really don't want to do that. But I think that I feel like a lot of parents that really would love to do it, but they say, well, I don't have enough patience, therefore I can't do it. The Lord will equip you. And just like Pastor Zach has said before, and other pastors that follow scripture will say, is that God has given you your children specifically to you. And you are exactly the parent that they need. And you may feel very ill-equipped for the job based on how your children's behavior is or personalities are. But I believe that the Lord gives us our children not just to populate the planet, but to teach us. They are our tool that the Lord can use to teach us lessons, just like we were taught in school or by our parents, is that our children are teaching us lessons every day, whether it's get on your knees for your family, whether it's discipleship opportunities. I feel like that homeschooling, all it does is just gives you more face time for those lessons.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
like Sarah said, you just have to be more intentional, and it's so feasible to do. But I think a lot of parents miss those opportunities for discipleship because of how busy we pack our schedules. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier. And so maybe it's time for parents to, number one, say, is the Lord calling me and my family to homeschool? Because it's a husband-wife situation.
Yeah.
I see several single dads that are getting on our Facebook group for the Dallas-Fort Worth area saying, I need to pull my child out of school, but I work from home. How can I do it? Like, they're asking for help. And so I feel like this state is in this area is extra kind and gracious, and we offer as much help. There's coaches literally that are homeschool coaches that will teach you everything you could ever hope to know, because some parents are intimidated to do it for high school. You know, I didn't do well in algebra myself, you know, so I can't. There is 101 opportunities for different things, like online programs for personal tutors via Zoom, especially in high school, or online courses where you can pause the video and get tutelage, you know, and get extra help. So I feel like parents that are neglecting the opportunity for homeschooling because they don't think that they are equipped, or they don't think, and just like Mandi figured out, you know what, it's not rocket science. The school systems are run by professionals, but I can tell you, as one of those professionals, I wasn't equipped to do every child in that classroom. Yeah. I had to get resources. I had to pull resources. I had to one-on-one talk with that parent, you know, like, your child needs this specific help. So I feel like that you need to go both directions. If you're going to homeschool, private school, or public school, the Lord can call you that to different seasons for different reasons. And so you just need to be open to what the Lord's calling you to and be obedient to it, because we can neglect it just like you can neglect anything the Lord's calling you to do. And then you end up out of his will, which the safest place to be is in his will. Right. So even though it might be uncomfortable to homeschool, I'm sure Sarah can attest, it's not comfortable to put your kid in public school either.
Yeah. Like, they have great days and terrible days.
Exactly.
And we had great days and terrible days
Exactly.
homeschooling. And I'm sure my mom questioned it just as much as I questioned public school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I feel like that's the biggest thing that Christians specifically need to do is ask the Lord, what am I being called to in this season of my life? And what is it going to be best for my children? And like your hybrid situation where possibly one of your students goes off and does, you just have to know that and pray about it deeply and lean in and just get maybe multiple counselors. Like, you have a lot of support in your church, get multiple counselors, and find a church that has, if you're interested in homeschooling, find a church that has homeschool co-ops, because basically what a homeschool co-op, for those who don't know what those are, it's basically just a group of parents that get together and they let their children hang out and play, and then there's usually directed lessons, and so there's so many opportunities for that. And there's even homeschool co-ops where the children are learning kind of in a more school traditional situation, and so you can get as close to public school or private school as you want in the homeschool situation. There's hybrid situations where you can send your child off to school for a couple days a week, keep them home for a couple days a week, depending on your community. So really, I feel like parents need to know what's out there, know what the options are, and do the research, and then they can make the best decision for their family.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to wrap it up.
Yeah.
She did the outro for us.
So before we wrap completely, Kyle and Brice, small kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. What kind of thought have you guys? I mean, Brice just barely
small
kid,
yeah.
right?
But
what kind of thoughts have you guys given to this? Like, before we kind of close out for the evening.
Oh, I'm terrified.
Oh yeah.
Of public school. It's been an interesting conversation. Me myself, I was in public school from kindergarten to 8th grade, and then I did private school for 4 years. Graduated out of a, and I'm doing air quotes, Christian high school, Baptist high school, here down the road. It was good in some areas, some years, and really bad in some areas in other years. But every school is going to be that way.
Yeah.
But Yeah, what I would say, is there's things that you can control and there's things you can't, right? When you talk about just family dynamics and if both parents are able to, or let me rephrase that, if both parents have to work, then, you need to surround, like Erin said, you need to surround the whole thing in prayer and say, hey, is this viable? Lord, are you calling me and my family to move in this direction? But I think me and Haley have decided when Addison, my 3-year-old, gets old enough that we're probably going to try to do homeschool first. Haley's a stay-at-home mom, and we're very lucky and blessed that was able to come to fruition. So before it wasn't really a possibility, but I think that with that scenario, I think we're going to try it because honestly, like I said before, public school kind of terrifies me, and I don't really, if I have a say in it, I don't really want anything to do with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Brice, any thoughts on it at this point?
Yeah. So my little girl is 2 months now, and so I still have about 5 years.
Yeah,
to
you gotta start figuring this out.
Time.
Yeah.
Which still scares me, knowing that I have that long for things to progress the way they are, than what they're going to be like in 5 years.
What is things going to look like in 5 years?
But
you need to assess year by year.
Yeah, but I mean, even now, you as a parent, you just start thinking about all the things you didn't think about before, and that's definitely a conversation that we've had. I think we would like to homeschool if we can, but again, it's 5 years is a long time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know what it's going to be like then. So we have our hopes and our wants, but ultimately, like Erin said, we're going to have to assess year by year and see where things are at.
So, if you'd like some resources about homeschooling, we will do the homework for you, and we have resources here at Lake Worth Baptist Church that will do the homework for you, or at least point you in the right direction. You can get a hold of us at podcast@lakeworthbaptist.org. You can drop us a line on Facebook or Instagram at LWBC_publications. We'd love to hear from you. And even if you just have a story that you'd like to share about homeschooling or public school, or kind of what swayed you as a parent into the realm of homeschooling or public schooling, we'd love to hear from you for that as well. Get a hold of us anytime. Don't forget to like, share, and follow the podcast. The more you share, the more people hear it, and we'd love to be a resource for people. Thank you, ladies, for coming on. It was a great discussion.
Absolutely.
We appreciate you being
fun.
willing to come and talk to us about all this stuff. I learned so much. Too late, but I learned so much.
Well, I learned everything. I was public schooled my entire life, so I had no idea. I'd never thought about homeschooling or what it was to be in homeschooling, and so that was very eye opening. And definitely have Jenna listen to this episode for sure, because it's I think every young parent, or every
crazy,
parent should
right?
probably listen to something
it's crazy
like
how
this.
much your mindset changes when you have kids.
Yeah.
Versus when you
for
didn't,
sure.
and just kind of what you hold to be valuable. But no, again, thank you guys for coming on. We really appreciate it. It was definitely a great conversation. Hope to have more like this in the future. Would love to hear from you guys. Again, I say this every episode, but we'd love to have a mailbag episode where we react to questions, answer questions, but be a little more interactive with our listeners. So definitely reach out everywhere Tom mentioned. We'd love to interact with you and minister to you in any way we can. Thank you again for listening to this podcast. Thinking Well Podcast. We'll be back for another episode next week. Stay safe, everybody.